not everybody's going to be Amazon or Walmart. But there's been a lot of collateral damage for people who try to mirror that model because it's a really tough way to go. The reality, and I talk to my entrepreneurs a lot about this. I said, only 4.3% of all businesses in America reach $1 million or more in revenue. It's a very tight peak at the top of that mountain. There's plenty of room at all levels for a lot of different people, but you got to be margin focused. You've got to figure out why you want to do this.
Hello, folks, and welcome. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Todd Palmer in the Mastermind. Todd is the CEO of Extraordinary Advisors, an executive coach, and author who is committed to improving lives. He's a successful entrepreneur and business owner who is passionate about helping individuals and companies take action towards high-level achievement. As the CEO of a 6-time Inc. 5000 company, Todd knows the struggles that businesses face around the areas of people, cash, strategy, and execution. Through his firm, Extraordinary Advisors, Todd is able to guide leaders to sustained profitability. Todd, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me.
So before we dive too far into the weeds here about business growth and leadership, how did you get into this world of advising leaders and business owners? Like, what was the background that put you into that position?
It's a really interesting journey. As a CEO, I had used a coach since 2006. The company was in pretty bad shape. I decided to fight through my imposter syndrome and reached out, got a coach, and we had really then reformatted the business and grown into some nice levels of success. At the same time, I was getting invited to speak at universities and colleges, and so I was doing a lot of mentoring with kids, students in the university programs. And so I was getting a lot of different feedback from those areas that what I had to say really resonated with them. And last, and probably most importantly, is I'm a 17-year member of EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization here in Detroit. And I found that on my forum table, that when there were a lot of tough issues that my forum mates were facing, they would reach out to me and I would coach them through their presentations to the bigger group. And got a lot of powerful feedback from some very, very trusted advisors in my life that maybe teaching and coaching would be something I should consider doing someday. And 3 years later, here I am.
Very cool. So even stepping back a little bit further, what even got you interested in entrepreneurship in the beginning?
Well, it's interesting from my perspective that, I was always an entrepreneur. I just didn't realize it. When I was in elementary school, I grew up in a really small town. I had literally 42 kids in my graduating class, which, kind of think back in the mid 80s, we're talking, small town, one stoplight, one grocery store, one gas station. So there'd be times when my mom would drive me to school for a variety of reasons. And I would stop at the store and I'd take all of my allowance money. I'd spend it all on my classmates' favorite candy. So if it was a dime, I'd take it to school and sell it for a quarter. And I was doing that, for 2-3 weeks. Come to find out that, my principal was not real happy, brought my mom in for the conversation. And she said, well, if the students want to buy what he's selling and what he's selling is candy, it's not illegal. What's the big deal? So that was kind of like my first endorsement from parents on, hey, entrepreneurship might not be such a bad thing. So I literally was doing that. I was selling baseball cards and other memorabilia. And then I eventually just morphed into when I was in college, recognizing and realizing that I think I might be better served working for myself than working for somebody else.
So did you come out of the gates out of college with starting your own business, or did you try your foot in the corporate world before?
Oh, I tried the corporate world. Yeah. And I was a terrible employee. I was terrible because I had a lot of ideas. I had a lot of different ways of solving the problems for the customers. I originally, right out of college, I actually taught at the university for 2 years in communication and marketing classes. Then I ended up becoming a single parent. My marriage ended. I was a single parent in my mid-20s. And I realized quickly that I was very difficult to continue to teach, go for my master's, and also be an employee. So I gave up the dream of teaching, then plugged into trying to be an employee, found that I didn't really do well being a yes man. I had a lot of ideas. I had a lot of passion, and I had no problem working hard. But being a single parent did cause me to have to work at different times and different intervals on occasion, especially when I'm home with a sick kid or I've got a school function to attend. So I'll work till 4:00, go to the function, put my son to bed, and then wrap up my paperwork in the middle of the night. It dawned on me that, I'm really working hard to make other people wealthy. I'm working really hard to make other people successful. Why wouldn't I want to do that for myself? And this is probably 1995, 1996. At the same time, I was realizing that because I was corporate, I was missing out on a lot of aspects of my son's youth. And I wanted to be part of those things. So it really seemed to me that, well, if I build a company, I control my schedule, I control my time, I can have the financial success that I'm seeking, but also have the parenting success that I'm seeking. No different than millennials today who are willing to trade, sometimes money for flexibility and freedom in a corporate world.
Yeah, I think that what you experienced there is going to resonate a lot with some of the listeners. Definitely resonates with me, just in terms of being more than willing to really grind at it and work hard, but looking to do the work more on your terms and according to your schedule. And I think you're right with millennials and the age of the digital age that we live in today. I think there is a strong push to have that flexibility, whether it's in a corporate environment or the entrepreneurial world. And entrepreneurship just has happened to cater to that for a longer period of time. And maybe now the rest of the world's catching on.
I think you're absolutely right. If you take a look at somebody who's doing, website design, or you think, my son's an accountant. He's 28. I talk with him a lot about, does your employer care about the number of hours you work, or do they care more about the quality of the work product you produce for their customers? And it's kind of this weird push and pull, especially in a more of an established world like accounting. And he's telling me all the time that younger people are leaving and hanging up their own shingles because they're happy to do the hard work. What they're not happy to do is be the first one in, the last one out for a partnership track that just basically equals just a little bit more money, but a lot more hassle, headache, and lack of freedom. In their generation, according to what he tells me, is really focused on having as much work-life integration as possible. I think they've realized work-life balance is really a myth. According to him, a myth perpetrated by older guys like you, Dad. It's more that work-life integration that they seek. And I think entrepreneurship has definitely proven for many people to be the way to go.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so I'm just really interested in those early days when you first went out on your own. You're a young guy, a single dad. You have a lot on your plate, and you're stretched then in terms of where you're spending your time, and always being turned on for something, whether it's being dad, whether it's being the founder and CEO of your young business. What were those early days like just in your life with all that going on?
It's really interesting to hear my son talk about that, because now that he's 28, we've had those conversations. The good thing is he doesn't really remember the missed Christmases or the other missed holidays that we spent the time together, but there wasn't any money. We were a startup company. Mm-hmm. So he has a different affiliation and an appreciation to hear, but those days were very stressful. And he now reports back into me that I was very focused. I was very schedule driven, but I wasn't a lot of fun, which is now, 20 plus years later, it really causes me to pause and to reflect upon that. And in fairness to him, he was correct. We would get up at 5:00 every morning. I'd drop him off at daycare by 6:30. From 6:30 to 8, I'd work out. I was in the office by 8:30 because I had to manage my stress. Work out, hit the office by 8:30, leave the office by 3:30, pick him up at daycare at 4. From 4 to 7 o'clock was our time. He was in bed by 7:30, and I was back to working from 8 until midnight. That was, 5 days a week, sometimes on the weekends as well. And that was a rigid discipline that it took to get going. Because when I started the business, there wasn't really, the internet was not a functional tool as a recruiter like it is now. I wrote a business plan. My business plan said I needed $150,000 to get off the ground. with, having a full support staff, an office, everything you needed. No one would loan a, 25-year-old single dad recently divorced that kind of money. So a friend of mine, you go to 3 Fs, right? Friends, family, and fools. A friend of mine gave me $15,000 and that's how I started the company. And I was driven to make it happen because, I am my son's only source of income, his only source of care. I had to make it work. And by day 72, thank goodness we actually turned a profit and we're on our way from there. But I made a lot of mistakes. I put in a lot of hours, and while he does remember all the school activities I was able to attend, he doesn't, sometimes he reported that, I wasn't always the happiest of go lucky of guys.
So based on that experience, what do you advise young entrepreneurs now when you see them going into those early days of starting a company and they may be juggling priorities of having a family or other financial responsibilities, that they need it to work and they need to make this thing happen?
Well, in all transparency, I tell them, don't do it like I did it. It was a lot of stress, a lot of challenge, a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of stress. What I didn't figure out at the time was, do I want to build and grow a company, or do I want to create a job for myself? I'm working with this group of entrepreneurs right now at Extraordinary Advisors, where there's 2 guys. They make $800,000 in revenue, but their margin's 50%. So they're taking home $400,000. These guys never want to get any bigger. They're super happy what they're doing. They don't want the hassle of managing employees. I got another client. They've been around. They're going into their 4th year. They're doing about $4.5 million in revenue, and they want to scale this thing up. And they're working 18 hours a day. They're blood sweating and tearing their way through this. And thank goodness they have great margins, so that allows them to have good times. But they're working really, really hard. So with both of the group of the entrepreneurs that I work with, the question I always ask them is a question I didn't ask myself until I was almost, 15 years into being an entrepreneur. Why am I doing this? And I got that. I was very fortunate when he just started, even before he wrote his first book, I was working with a guy named Simon Sinek. And we figured out why I want to do what I want to do. And I really wanted to improve lives. Now, it took me 2 years of work to figure that out for myself. So with all my entrepreneurs that I work with, I had them figure out why they do what they do. And if an entrepreneur says to me, I want to be a millionaire, I want to make a lot of money, that's why I'm doing it, they're typically not a good fit for me. They're not a good fit because I've been there, been on the Inc. 5000 6 times, been to this party, met this person. It didn't fill my passion within because I hadn't identified my passion, which is improving lives. So, and the great thing is it helped me shift what success meant look like. Success at one point was money, house, all that, the material trappings. Now for me, success is really simple. It's doing what I want, when I want to do it, as often as I want to do it, with whom I want to do it with. Now, you could do a great vacation to, Madrid, or you can go for a walk in your neighborhood with your family and have amazing conversations. They all meet my criteria of success. So I help the entrepreneurs not only figure out why they want to do what they're doing, but most importantly, what do they define success as? How do we take the success model with the why model, bring them together to help them grow and scale their business if that's what they choose to do?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, Simon Sinek's definitely the right guy to talk to in the world of why.
It's just truly amazing. I remember meeting him. He had his easel and his marker, and that's it.
That's awesome. But I like what you said there about asking yourself, do you want to build and grow a company, or do you want to create a job for yourself, and really understanding what your metric of success is and then why you're doing it. So for anybody who's listening, are there specific questions that they can ask themselves that will help them really get to the root of those 2 areas?
Well, when I work with a client, I do a couple of things with them to kind of, and it is a kind of, it's a crawl, walk, run process. So I have them fill out a thing, and it's a free tool that any of your listeners can go out and do right now, and it's called coloredcode.com. And it tells you what your personality is like and what your communication style is, especially if you are part of a leadership team. It's good to know what your style is, and it's good to know what the style of your team is. Once we figure that out, then I have a better mechanism of how to communicate with them in a language pattern that they best hear. It's so important for me as a coach to listen to absorb, not listen to respond. I need to hear what they're saying. I need to take it in. I need to process it. And then I need to ask good questions, probing questions off of what I'm hearing. My job isn't to solve a problem sometimes. My job is to throw out questions to ponder. We go through that process. That's usually the first day. So by the second day, we're into why do they do what they do? And we'll go back to childhood. We'll go back to, I have a lot of entrepreneurs. I call it they had the big black hole within. They weren't cool enough as a kid. They were the nerds. They weren't the however they self-describe it. But there's usually something that drives them. And it's sometimes it's with, a parent, a sibling, a friend, a classmate, a teacher who said they couldn't do something. Sometimes it's even with people who may have passed away. Like for me, a lot of my drive came up from being, my father passed away when I was 5 years old. And a lot of my drive through my mid-20s was to prove something to somebody who passed away. It was the craziest thing. And so I hope the entrepreneur figure that out for themselves. What drives them? I've got one entrepreneur, for example, that wants to build a legacy business. And I ask him why it drives him. And then we have to have a conversation. Does the people he want to build a legacy business for, do they even want to work in the business? And sometimes those are very eye-opening conversations because sometimes those people don't want to work there. Another entrepreneur I work with, he wants to build and scale his business and sell it. Great, we can totally do that. And he's well on his way. But now he's coming up with wow, I may not want to sell this. Why? Well, I remember what it was like to be super poor. I grew up in poverty. And now what I think would motivate me more is to create this company that will not only take care of me and my family, but take care of all of my employees. He's got 12 employees. So they can retire early and enjoy the fruits of their labor. So maybe I don't want to build it to sell it anymore. So the reasons change constantly. It's just until we figure what drives that entrepreneur and they'll tie that into the mission statement of the company, a lot of disconnects and a lot of hassles come into play that can be eliminated.
Yeah, we just had a conversation on the podcast with a guy named Jake Badsgard, and he went through a realization that when he started his business, his why, or what his metric of success, I guess, was to have a net worth of $50 million. But then realized that over time that changed for his metric of success to create 50 millionaires outside of himself.
Gotcha.
And so it fits really well with kind of what you're talking about. But one thing that I think would be helpful is understanding that process a little bit of getting to the root of what drives you. I think first and foremost, people can look you up and connect with you to get there. But if they don't have the means and they're just getting started right now and they're trying to figure out, all right, how on my own can I do that? Or can I leverage my network or something like that? Do you have any suggestions on where people start to get to the root of what drives them?
I use a lot of the same methodologies that I've learned from my current coach. His name is Dr. Daniel Friedland. He's one of the world's leading neuroscientists. And he not only coaches business, he coaches athletes, he coaches a lot of high performers. And he starts at the same platform that I start with is, what are your greatest fears and self-doubts? Seems like an odd place to start if you want to be successful. We have to know who you are. And then we help identify what that mindset is and figure out what's working and what's not working. So for me, in 2006, my business was in pretty bad shape. I was 9 years old in the company, and I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing. The company got $600,000 in debt. I was 2 months away from running out of all of my money, and I walked in September and fired my entire company and started over because I was so wrapped up in the mindset of imposter syndrome, the mindset of self-reliance. I couldn't ask anybody for help. So the first thing I did is I had to identify that mindset. I didn't even recognize it at the time. But it's almost like someone who has a substance issue, someone who's a drug addict or an alcoholic. Once they hit bottom, then we work with them. And a lot of the entrepreneurs who end up coming to me have hit bottom. Their the self-awareness is lower when they're successful. It's not until they realize, hey, we're reaching a capacity of danger and we're in the danger zone, so to speak. So figure out what the fears and self-doubts are. So what I figured out for me was the self-reliance that had gotten me from age 5 to age, 35 no longer served me well. And I needed a new tape in my head. I needed a new mantra. So then I created some different intentions, not expectations. I think a lot of people get, I expect this, I expect that. We do that to our kids. I expect all A's, and all you want to talk to Johnny about is the one B he got. What is your intention? Well, my intention was I needed to get out of that debt. My intention was I want to be successful in some capacity, but if I expect to be successful in only the way I've been trying for 9 years, it's not working. I need to do something different. So first thing is identify the mindset. Second thing is set an intention, not an expectation. Off of that intention, any entrepreneur then can create a strategy. What strategy do you want to go after? And take action, which is essentially the execution phase. And get feedback from the marketplace. Get feedback from friends, from family, from customers, from Wall Street. It doesn't really matter. Get that feedback. Take that feedback and do something with it. Learn, iterate, repeat. Learn, iterate, repeat. It's not a zero-sum game. What Friedland really taught to me is failure doesn't exist. It's a word in the dictionary. And Danny says it so brilliantly. He says, if I've tried something and I've learned, I've not failed. All I've done is take another step along my pathway to success. And he talks about it from a neuroscience perspective is the only way the human brain really learns effectively is through trial and error. So we've got to step into that uncomfortable zone of trying something. So I found that formula to be super successful, and that's the formula I use with my clients.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of stands out to me is that concept of the trial and error, but making sure that you're taking that feedback and proactively using that to make a change, because that, like you said, the setting an intention, not an expectation, where you're wired to expect things to work based on your past, based on the subconscious way that you've adapted to situations, and you've learned that you expect that success to come, but rather than having that expectation, being able to learn from your failures is key. And we've talked about failure quite a bit on the show. And I think that it's a hot topic as well, failure way forward, and hurry up to failure and things like that. But if you're not learning from it and truly being intentional about taking what went into that failure so that you can change it the next time, I think that that's where you can fall into a trap where failure is almost glamorized. But when you actually are implementing those changes and taking that feedback seriously and being able to leverage that, that's when you can really make things happen in the positive direction.
I couldn't agree with you more. Expectation is a yes/no game. Intention is an and/both game. One of my favorite examples is Barbara Corcoran from the TV show Shark Tank. I love the female successful entrepreneurial stories because they're so rare. And she tells a story where her intention was to open up the New York State real estate market to the world before she joined Shark Tank. And she was her second year in business, and she bought a bunch of videotaping equipment and a bunch of duplicating stuff, and she was going to mail videotapes across the United States. That was how she thought it would open up the New York City real estate market. What she discovered was it didn't work. Someone in California would request a tape. It takes 3 days to get across the country. They take 2 days to let it sit on the kitchen table. Then they finally throw it in the VCR and they watch it. And most of the real estate is gone. Just about that time, there was this new invention called the internet. She threw the content on the internet. 2 days later, she had a $700,000 check from London from somebody she'd never spoken with, who saw something he wanted, and he bought it sight unseen, deposit down, and voila, she now had opened up the New York market to the globe, to the world, giving her a massive competitive edge over everybody else. Imagine if she just stuck with her expectation that the only way to do this is by mailing out videotapes. She changed that because she stuck to her intention, and I think she's worth $80 to $100 million now. Got to give a lot of credit to her for sticking to that intention and not getting wrapped up in just the expectation.
Yeah, no, that's super powerful and a great example. You also talked about failure earlier in terms of early in your entrepreneurial journey. There were a lot of things that went wrong, didn't work how you expected them to, and really stumbled your way through it. Would you be able to share a story of a time that you did run into failure and you either did or didn't change your focus instead of on expectation, but to intention to really learn and grow from that, and kind of what the result was of it?
Oh gosh, how much time do you have? I got 100 of them. So I think a real relevant story, as I shared with the audience a few minutes ago, we got $600,000 in debt. And part of the reason we got there is we were chasing the wrong type of customer. We're in the Metro Detroit market. We place industrial talent, factory workers, for lack of a better description. And we used to chase what you would call whale accounts. And a whale account was somebody who used, 50 to 200 people per day. It's a great sized account. You get a lot of people working. The revenue number looks really good, but the margins are just terrible. Just terrible. But I wasn't focused on the right thing. So the first thing I learned is in the staffing space, I couldn't just focus solely on the revenue. I had to really pay attention to the margin. If the margin didn't meet a minimum threshold, we would just turn the client down. So that's the first thing I learned. But we had a client, and the traditional payment terms back in those days was 90 to 120 days. That's what we're told that we were dictated to by the client, and some of the big national competitors were also giving those terms. When you have a big bank account and a vault full of cash, you can do that. As a startup entrepreneur, you can't always match the big boys on the pricing and the terms. And we chose to try to do both. This client, unbeknownst to us, was having massive financial problems and ended up going bankrupt. And they stuck us with $242,000 in unpaid invoices. Mm. And because they weren't considered wages, they could do that because they were considered my wages. So not only did they stick me with that, I had to pay all of those employees who had done all the work for this company that knowingly, purposefully, strategically went out of business. Pretty painful thing to go through. So what I learned from that is that we focus, one, on the margin, not on the revenue. Two, we don't, the clients no longer dictate our payment terms. We decided what industry we are in. We're in the human capital industry. And human capital gets paid either weekly or biweekly. And as a human capital provider, so do we. We are not in the banking business. We don't extend credit. And from that, we made a lot of changes, but it was a very, very bitter pill for us to swallow on very razor thin margins. So we basically learned, we've got to focus on the margins. We've got to focus on being who we are and who we're not. We can't let our clients always dictate everything to us. You can have price, but price or terms, you can't have both. And if the price doesn't meet our minimum, well, then we can't work with you. So it created a lot of much tighter financial pieces. So one of the always things I always tell people that was real painful for me to learn, and I wish I would have learned it sooner, was focus on the margin, focus on the payment terms. Don't focus on trying to make everybody happy all the time.
No, that's a great example. And so when you started to implement those changes, obviously that requires some conversations with your customers and your clients. And if they're used to working one way and having terms set in those 30 or 60 or 90 or whatever it may be, and all of a sudden those payment terms change quite significantly, what are those conversations like? Or how do you recommend people approach those situations when you might not be matching what the national behemoths are doing, but sure, you need to do it to make it work for your business?
Well, I think for me, it was the biggest thing is I had to, as the owner and as the entrepreneur, I had to get good with it myself. I had to be okay with telling the client no. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs get addicted to the word yes. Yes, I want to use you. Yes, you can solve my problem. Yes, you can start on Monday. We like that. It feeds within. For me, the reality was it's yes under these proper terms, in defining those terms. And that's where my coach at the time really helped me out quite a bit. And we laid out a healthy financial strategy. Because remember, we're $600,000 in debt. People wanted that money back. And they trusted us. In a sense, they really trusted me to honor my commitments. And I didn't want to do what had been done to me and go through bankruptcy. That didn't seem like the most ethical way to behave. I saw other options. Even if it was delayed gratification for me, these people were owed their money. They should be paid. And so what I did is I empowered the staff to tell the client simply no. The clients had never been told no because they had been dictating the terms, especially in Detroit. Now, this is back in the mid 90s, right before the recession. And all the companies were acting as if they were the big three automotive, dictating terms on everything. So we would simply say no. And we were able to say no, and we were able to get them to our terms because we had the one thing they needed. We had moved away from being a general staffing provider to being a very niche specific provider. We went from providing bodies to actually providing talent that could be measured, and talent that had an ROI. And it was unicorn talent that other people didn't have. So that was our leverage point. We focused from being client centric to being job seeker candidate centric. So if I've got a great guy who makes $30 an hour and he's one of one, it's like being a sports or a Hollywood agent. Mike Trout or Brad Pitt, this is what they cost. And this is when they're going to get paid, and this is how it goes. We really took that high level recruiting mentality to the blue collar sector. And that helped quite a bit. But our people had to be good. We couldn't do that. We couldn't have that leverage point if our people were mediocre or less than. So that really shifted. And the other thing I did too is when I let everybody go in September of 2006, I changed the way I hired. I used to hire people who were just, we had recruiting backgrounds or HR backgrounds. When I flipped that on its head, saying, you know what, I want to hire good people. So we came up with a process to hire for DNA, not for resume. So those people, I had their buy-in because I didn't know any different. I didn't have to go to Bob the recruiter and say, hey, these are the new payment terms for the customers, and listen to him give me a lot of pushback because he worked for me, and then before that he worked at Kelly Services and he worked at Manpower. I had Lisa, who had just come from a medical profession, and she's like, I said, these are the payment terms. She's like, okay. She didn't know any different. There wasn't any pushback. So I think her mindset going into it, and when she did get the pushback, we gave her training on how to handle that pushback, and it proved to be a very successful model for us.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it comes back to creating a product or service that is so good that you have the ability to dictate those terms and to really have control over your business and how it operates, so you're not pigeonholed into the way some of the bigger guys do it. And especially as a startup, if you're forced to compete with on price or on terms because you're providing the exact same service and you're not niche down enough, you're gonna lose every time, because these companies have that ability. Like you said, they've got the vault full of cash and can make it happen. So I appreciate you sharing that story.
Well, I think the biggest pain point in that story for most companies is they die somewhere in the middle. They've decided that they don't want to be a low-cost provider. They don't want to be a low-cost provider, but they don't want to be a premium provider. So they try to please everybody in the middle, and by not picking a side, they end up dying because they're trying to serve all people at all times, and it simply can't work. At the end of the day, you really have to decide who you are and what do you stand for and what do you represent. Are you a low-cost volume provider, which is fine, there's a huge need for that? Or are you a premium product provider or a premium service provider? And can you clearly and succinctly measure and show that to somebody in order for them to want to be able to pay you that kind of money? If you're a restaurant, are you the Morton's at $75 for a steak, or are you Sizzler for $12 a steak? Mm-hmm. They're both steak, but which bucket do you sit in?
Yeah. Another thing that I would love to understand is taking a little bit of a right turn here, but if you could go back in time and talk to yourself when you were 24, 25, recently single, you're going to start that first business, or you just launched it. Is there one piece of advice that you'd go back and give to yourself at that stage in the game, now knowing everything that you do?
I think there'd be a ton of advice. It's not just one thing. I think it really goes back to, though, figuring out, why do you want to do this? So for me, I'd have to figure out, why is this so important to me? What is my overall driver for this? And for me, it was really trying to prove things to other people at times, flat out. Secondarily, it was, I want to have more freedom and flexibility to spend more time with my son. Once I figured that all out, then really, I thought the only path to success was to be a really big company. Well, then I would shift that to being, okay, well, what does it mean to be a really big company? What is the price I'm going to have to pay? And do I have the skill sets necessary to become that big company? And once I figured that out, I would then take it down the path of, do I want to be a volume provider or do I want to be a niche provider? There are a lot of companies that make a great living in companies that take care of the families of the employees they work for by being a niche provider. Not everybody's going to be Amazon or Walmart. Thank goodness. I mean, I give Jeff Bezos and Sam Walton a ton of credit for trying to be, but there's been a lot of collateral damage for people who try to mirror that model because it's a really tough way to go. The reality, and I talk to my entrepreneurs a lot about this. I said, only 4.3% of all businesses in America reach $1 million or more in revenue. It's a very tight peak at the top of that mountain. There's plenty of room at all levels for a lot of different people, but you got to be margin focused. You've got to figure out why you want to do this and what's going to be your special, unique offering to the marketplace, or you open a bunch of dollar stores and go into the real estate space. Choice is yours. I'm good with anything, and I want to help people be successful. I just wish for me I would have been a little bit more strategic as to what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it, not what I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's some great advice to the former Todd Palmer. I love it. Todd, if people are enjoying listening to you, they want to learn more about you and check out what you're up to, where would you point them to find out more?
Well, anybody who's listening today who wants to connect with me, by all means, please go to my website, extraordinaryadvisors.com. And what I'd like to offer your audience is anybody who heard me today and got value out of the conversation would like to talk with me more. I'm happy to give you 30 minutes of my time, no cost, free of charge. Simply just mention that you heard me on the podcast today, and we can talk about cash, people, strategy, execution. If you want me to tell more horror stories of things I did, I'm happy to do that. But I think it's a great opportunity for me to exhibit what I really believe in, improving lives. And it's also a way for me to give back to the people who've mentored me and coached me over the years. So I'm happy to make that connection with people and try to provide value in that way.
Well, that's super generous and appreciate that offer. We'll have your website linked up in the show notes so that people can find that without any issues. But Todd, thank you so much for coming on today. It was awesome hearing about your experience and some of the things that you've helped other entrepreneurs, the barriers that you've helped them break down and the walls that you've crumbled for them. So thank you for taking the time to be here today. We really appreciate you.
Hey, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, would you mind doing me an enormous favor? Could you drop a quick rating or review right there in your Apple Podcasts app on your phone? It helps so much in growing the show and helping more people find it. And when more